Welcome to the Situation Report today. This is the show where we do our very best to give you the information and perspectives you need to navigate an ever-changing culture. My name is Jeremy Stolnicker. I am your host today, and we're coming back to a topic we've discussed a few different times on this show, but it's one that we'll discuss many more times in the future, I'm sure. And even this week, this has become a topic again because it's in the news again because many in the railroad industry have been threatening a strike. Looks like perhaps that strike will be avoided, but that brings back to the surface the issues we continue to have here in the United States with the supply chain. We talk about our supply chain issues going all the way back to really when COVID started and many people were out of work. And so the supply chain was not functioning the way that it was supposed to. We had a guest on, Tho Bishop. We've had him on a few different times from the Mises Institute, helping us to understand that. But again, these issues continue. We've seen it with baby formula. We've seen it with diapers, baby products, big issue, of course. Food in some parts of the country, shelves nearly empty. And these things fluctuate. There's an up and a down. There's an ebb and a flow to all of it. But it continues to bring back this topic of the supply chain in the United States, how we get the goods that we use. Before we jump into that, though, I would imagine if you've been to the grocery store recently, you've noticed that things are more expensive. Gas is more expensive. It doesn't matter where you live in this country, things are more expensive. The economy, our economic future is uncertain. And we have to ask ourselves the question, what is it that we can do to protect our financial future for our families, for our children? What can we do personally? One of the things I would recommend is at least considering adding gold and silver into your IRA, your investment accounts. Take a look, figure out how to do that, and see if that is the right fit for you. The place that you can start is with Lear Capital. Call Lear Capital, and you can get their free Precious Metals Investor Guide. You can also ask them about their Lear Advantage IRA that lets you transfer or roll over your old 401k or IRA into a gold and silver tax advantage IRA. Plus, Lear is offering right now crazy shipping, free shipping, and up to $15,000 in bonus gold or silver with a qualified purchase. This is something you at least need to take a look at. You can call for details, 800-489-6450. Lear Capital is the most rated precious metals company on Consumer Affairs with a near perfect rating on Trustpilot. Call them at 800-489-6450. That is 800-489-6450. Calling that number, you will get your free kit, and there you will learn how gold has performed during periods of inflation, government debt, interest rate hikes, economic crashes, even wars, and how in all of those gold has been the financial bedrock asset in portfolios. One of the things I love about Lear Capital is that they are an American-owned company, proud to do business with Americans that share conservative values. Write this number down, 800-489-6450. Call them today, or if you don't want to call, you can click the link below in the show description and the show notes. Check them out. You will do yourself a great service by at least investigating Lear and what they have to offer. For many of us, if you're like me, you hear the term supply chain and you have an idea of what that means, but maybe don't fully understand how what's happening somewhere else impacts you directly. And so grateful today to have on actually two guests and a bit of an economic roundtable, if you will, talking about these issues with two men who spend a lot of time thinking about them. We have on with us today William Anderson. William is a fellow of the Mises Institute and a retired professor of economics at Frostburg State University. He earned his MA in economics from Clemson University and his PhD in economics from Auburn University, where he was a Mises Research Fellow. He writes and edits much of the content that you'll find on Mises.org, which again, Tho Bishop has talked a lot about with us. So many great resources there. And William even talks about this again as the interview concludes. But such a great mind on just economics generally and how what's happening in the economic world impacts us directly. Grateful to have him on. We also have with us today Jim Nelles. Jim Nelles is the Senior Vice President of global supply chain management for Blue Bird. And man, he is dealing with this every single day. And again, you'll hear in the interview such an incredible perspective on what is happening. I'll read from his bio. In his current role, he is responsible for optimizing Blue Bird's global supply chain, ensuring best-in-class cost, quality, and throughput, and forging long-term strategic partnerships to secure critical components. He's been doing this for more than 20 years. He is truly an expert on the supply chain. And man, we had a great conversation. I learned so much. I always approach economic conversations very hesitantly because I have had classes. I have tried to understand. I read articles. I do my best, but there's math involved. And I always struggle with the math. Thankfully, we have a great conversation today about the supply chain, what it is, how it impacts us, what can be done, and even how we as consumers can really hedge our lives against what potentially could happen in the future if it doesn't go well. So many great conversations, and very grateful to be able to share this interview with you. William Anderson, Jim Nelles, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. Appreciate your time. And man, what a crazy time we're living in. But thanks for coming on and talk about some of this.
My pleasure. Nice to see you.
Yeah. Thank you, man. Appreciate the invite.
So we are always talking about supply chain, it seems. The whole world is talking about it. And I think most people have no idea what any of it means. And then now we are faced with a railroad strike potentially that will certainly impact supply chain. And man, there's a lot to this. Jim, I wanted to start with you as the Senior Vice President of Global Supply Chain Management. I know you have a unique perspective on this. I would imagine this is something that you spend a lot of time, if not worrying about, thinking about. Kind of give us a thumbnail on this, the 30,000-foot view on what a railroad strike would mean, some of the supply chain issues that we've had and why we're having them, and how that impacts the end user. I mean, that's where I'm sitting. I've got a family I need to provide for. What does all of this mean on a everyman kind of level?
Well, let's start with the railroad strike. And fortunately, it looks like they're going to avert the strike. So they agreed yesterday in principle to an agreement. They'll have to still ratify that with their union members. One union's already voted that they don't want to accept it, so we'll see what happens. But if they do strike, it's quite frightening. Just under 30% of all goods move on rail in the United States. A railroad strike would cost the economy about $2 billion a day. And it would hit us in some areas that could really hurt. Agricultural products and bulk chemicals as well as automobiles. Now think about bulk chemicals. If you don't get chlorine, what can't you do? You can't chlorinate your water, then you can't drink your water. So that could lead, if it went extended for an extended period of time, not only to a food crisis, but a health crisis, along with just a further devastation to the U.S. economy. I don't believe that the government would allow a protracted strike. I think they would step in and deem it illegal and basically force them to accept the recommendation of the federal government's Presidential Emergency Board, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. William, we talk a lot about supply chain. This is just the next kind of iteration of that, but we've been talking about this for a couple of years. As an economist, can you give us a perspective on when we talk about supply chain, what are we actually talking about?
All right. Number one, you have to understand something. The United States is a very complex economy. You and I consume goods that are made or produced perhaps even up to thousands of miles away. All right, certainly. And that therefore goods have to be transported, not just goods, but also component parts. Think, for example, of gasoline. You say, well, gasoline is moved by pipeline. Well, ethanol is not, all right? And ethanol is a required additive in most gasolines, and most ethanol is moved by rail. You cannot move it by pipeline because it eats the seals. The alcohol eats the seals. And so you think, all those new tank cars on trains, all right, now that is a railroad strike means that ethanol is not getting to the refineries, and so therefore the refineries would have to shut down, especially a place like California where they pay absolute fealty to whatever the pollution laws is. That they would never allow oh, well, we'll just have gasoline without ethanol for a while. They would never allow that, no matter what, even if it meant shutting down the whole economy. And so you have to keep in mind that, with this kind of complexity, that you would have it, and it goes back again all the way to the source. Let's say, for example, agricultural products. That means crops rotting in the fields. It doesn't mean, oh, we'll put them away and then later on we'll pick them up. No, some crops that are moved would be done that are moved by rail. You can't just all of a sudden say, okay, well, we'll just haul them by truck, because you don't have the capacity or the contractual relationships to do that. So what you're talking about, what you do is you start from the final product, you start working backward and think of component parts, how it all gets together, and in the end, what we have is one big mess.
How much of this mess is because of two reasons we've been given in the last couple of years is COVID, employee shortages, people who are working just aren't available, and the other one is what's happening in Eastern Europe. How much do those events kind of globally impact the supply chain issues that we've been dealing with? And I know both of you have probably an opinion on that.
Sure. So I think COVID was a catalyst that exposed a lot of the weaknesses in the supply chain. It wasn't just COVID. Another thing that helped to exploit the supply chain issues is a number of companies over the last 20 years have gone to just-in-time delivery and minimizing their inventory. And that is fine when the supply chain is running smoothly. When there's a hiccup, they run out of inventory, they can't make their parts, or they can't get the components to make their parts, which means they can't supply the rest of the people. Over-reliance on offshoring and low-cost country sourcing. When your supply chain extends into China and Vietnam and places like that, it's very easy to get a hiccup. And then the labor shortage as well. But there's one other aspect of this that I think is really contributing to the supply chain issues, and I think that's the overregulation on the part of the government of the different aspects of supply chain. I'll give you a great example. There are some amazing American soldiers in the ages of 18 to 20 years old who drive 18-wheeler trucks for the military. They are forbidden by law from driving across state lines as a private commercial driver. They can get a driver's license at a commercial driver's license at the age of 18, but they must remain in their home state. They can't cross state lines. That's ridiculous. In California, you can't bring a truck with an engine older than 2006 into California. As of December 31st of this year, that goes up to 2010. That's going to take another 80,000 trucks off the road in California. California law AB 5, which was the gig economy law aimed at trying to get Uber to hire people. That's going to take another 70,000, up to 70,000 trucks off the California highways. And last, I think there's a labor issue. If you look at the power that the railroads have, we just talked about that, but also the longshoremen and the dock workers on the West Coast. They've been working without a contract since July 1st. They're threatening to strike. They haven't done that yet. But the two biggest issues that they're fighting on, one is automation of the ports. They are fighting very hard to keep the ports from being automated, which is why the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach rank as the bottom two efficient ports in the world. We're behind countries like Congo and Nigeria when it comes to the efficiency of ports, and that's really embarrassing. There's no single American port in the top 10. The best performing American port is number 23, and that's the Port of Virginia.
Wow, unbelievable. William, what's causing this?
Well, and let me go on with that too, because understand that about 40% of our imports come in through the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach. So this is not a trivial issue, and this goes all the way back, because most of your trade now, and in terms of import, what's actually transported via boat is done by containers. Container shipping is the method by which we do it. And if you think about before how long it took to load up a ship with the old way, and then once we went to containers, that it was much faster process. Well, unions don't like that because, number one, it takes away from the need of union workers, and thus it takes away their powers. And the Longshoremen's Union for years has been not only very militant, it's been very corrupt, and so you get that kind of thing where they, and it's been protected by Democratic politicians.
Yeah.
And so in a place like California, where this is a one-party state, and I live in California, I can tell you.
I live in California
state.
too. I feel like you guys are beating up on me a little bit, but I'm glad to know, William, you're here too. So we're all suffering.
Although I'm in Placer County, which is not a Democrat county, and it's actually fairly well run. But the problem that these things that it's bad enough, but if you don't have COVID, okay, you have a system that functions because people generally show up for work on time. There are weaknesses. I absolutely agree with you that COVID exposed a lot of the weaknesses, but also what happened was that when people were ready to go back, it was hard to put these things together precisely because of the regulatory system. Like you talk about California taking trucks off the road. What you have is legislators just set these arbitrary dates. And trust me that a truck in 2006, its emissions are not going to be anything. I'm not even insignificantly greater or worse than emissions from a 2010 vehicle, but it's just the California legislature doing things because they can do it. And so this is that you end up with a real problem. And also keep in mind that the people passing this legislation and the governor signing the legislation, Governor Newsom, that they do not bear a cost for the chaos that comes afterwards. Why is it? Because, their big thing, frankly, the thing that runs Democratic politics is the sexual revolution. And as long as they are fairly radical in the sexual revolution, for whatever reason, voters in California are going to vote that. And what they'll do with everything else when stuff blows up, when it's hard to get, when shelves are empty, it's hard to get goods on the shelf, well, you just blame capitalism. And now, okay, you've got a ready-made thing. You blame, this company or that company, whatnot. You blame the price system. It's just all. Then it becomes a conspiracy.
So, and that takes us to an interesting question, and one that is being a statement that's being even pushed today is that the government is creating the supply chain crisis. The government is creating it. Now, I think we could say they are creating it through policy, but when we talk about the government creating the supply chain issue, is that an intentional creation of a problem so that the government has to solve it? When we talk about that, when we say that, what do we mean by that? Is it just they're not good at this, or they're intentionally trying to hurt the economy?
Well, they're definitely not good at it. I don't know if they're necessarily trying to hurt the economy as much as they are trying to put forth their agenda, and the side effects of their agenda be damned for the rest of the world. So, for example, we talked about the emissions with the different truck engines and the dates of the truck engines. That's a purely random line in the sand that they've drawn to help push a green initiative. The gig economy is to try to help more union members get into place, right? That AB 5 law in California. The stimulus act that they passed, $1.3 trillion in stimulus. Guess what? Only $17 billion of that goes to U.S. ports. $17 billion of that. As a comparison, $65 billion is going to help give better broadband to people who don't have broadband. So we can't get the goods into the country that we need to build the materials and to get stuff to the store shelves, but we're not spending the money to get it fixed. Instead, we're trying to get equity in roads and bridges and things like that, and that's not really going to help the economy at all. In fact, it's going to hurt it.
Yeah.
No, and what you have to understand, okay, the people passing this are politicians.
Yeah.
Okay, they do not have they may have a personal stake in that they're inconvenienced by their idiocy, like like the rest of us. But they don't pay a political price for it. And anytime with a politician is always looking, how does this affect my chances for re-election in the future? That is the only thing that matters in the end. They are not guardians of the economy. They're not people that say, man, what we really want is for people to really have the opportunity to live well. If that were the case in a private enterprise economy, then nobody would be needing the politician services, or nobody would think about it. So but I think that the other part of it, I never want to give them too much credit. I've never, most politicians that I have talked to, and I've talked to them from Al Gore to George W. Bush to whatever, that they're pretty clueless. It's the rare politician that actually can sit down and have a halfway intelligent discussion of economics. That they're not going to do. They're going to be they're going to hold to a lot of pretty crackpot ideas. And the other thing is that you have to talk about your constituency. AB 5 was written by the AFL-CIO. Now, the AFL-CIO, for all of the rhetoric that says we represent all workers, that's nonsense. Of course, they don't represent all workers. They can't represent all workers. They don't want to represent all workers. They want to represent themselves because they want benefits, and the only way that they can get extra benefits for their people is to exclude other people. It's a wealth transfer, and you got to have people to transfer. Workers. And by the way, it's not transferring wealth from the company, no matter what they say. AB 5 did not transfer wealth from the billionaires. It transferred wealth from the people who lost their jobs. Right. And that was where the wealth transfer comes. But getting a politician to see that, number one, and getting them to care is another thing. I mean, remember when freelance writers lost their jobs, the woman from San Diego who originally sponsored AB 5, her retort was, well, those weren't very good jobs anyway. Yeah. And so, in other words, that it's basically screw you. Here, this, you see this is my middle finger. And and so that's that's where it goes. And so you have to understand that, again, if their agenda causes a problem, why then it's capitalism. It's free enterprise. It's these business executives. It's like Robert Reich. There's no inflation. They're just greedy corporations. Oh, okay. Well, that. And every progressive reposts that on Facebook, and it becomes their religion.
It's all that middle finger policy that is driving everything. That's going to be my new phrase: middle finger policies. What are policies? So we've got midterm elections coming up. I don't know how much that's going to impact this. A new president gets into office. Let's say the right person gets into office, sitting in the seat. They have the ability to make whatever decisions they want to make. So we're talking about a very utopian world here. What are the right policies that could be put in place now that would turn this thing around? What are some things that need to be done to get us back to where things are working well?
Well, I think we've already talked about some of them, such as repealing that you must be 21 years old to drive a truck, because what that causes is a whole generation of people who may want a career as a truck driver go into construction or bricklaying or something like that because they don't have the opportunity to make money. You lose that. I'd like to see a lot of these other laws repealed, where you have to have a certain year engine in your truck to get into California. The other thing I would like to see repealed, and William, I'd love your thoughts on this, is the Jones Act. It's not very well known, but the Jones Act is a law that says you can't ship from one U.S. port to another U.S. port unless the boat meets 4 requirements. It must have been built in the United States. It must be 75% owned by U.S. citizens. It must be 75% manned by U.S. citizens, and it must fly the U.S. flag. As of yesterday, there were 100 ships that met that requirement in the world, and they're all older ships, and they're much more expensive to operate. And what does this mean? It basically means that if a ship leaves Shanghai and has half of its container loads are meant for Hawaii. If it stops in Hawaii, it cannot continue to the port of Los Angeles and unload the rest of it. So what happens is that ship leaves Shanghai, goes to the port of Los Angeles, everything gets unloaded there, and then it gets put on one of these 100 boats, 100 ships, and shipped back to Hawaii. And some estimates say that that's costing Hawaiians an extra 30% in the cost of the goods that they have to purchase. But it's not just Hawaii. Imagine some place where you could set up what we call in trucking milk runs, where you drop stuff off in the port of Vancouver and then in the port of Los Angeles. Then you go through the canal and you're dropping things off at the port of Savannah and the port of Jacksonville. That would cut costs tremendously, and it would also reduce a lot of the congestion at the ports. If we did some of those things, I think we'd be in great shape.
Unbelievable.
I'll tell you what, the Jones Act is one of these abominations. And by the way, Trump, when he was president, refused to suspend the Jones Act even to get stuff to Puerto Rico. And in other words, that you had to transport stuff from the United States to Puerto Rico in one of these cranky old tubs of which you speak. And it wreaks havoc in the cruise industry. It wreaks havoc, period. It also creates a real problem, especially on the coast, because you could do a lot better. You could, let's say, for example, shipping goods from Washington to Los Angeles. All right, that the only way we can do it now in the United States is do it by rail and truck, because we just don't have the capacity to move these goods by ship. Because the idea is you can't leave a U.S. port, and then if you're a foreign-owned ship, you can't leave a U.S. port and then dock at another U.S. port. You have to go to a foreign port first, and then you could go. And so that's why you end up with it's a real mess. Yeah, getting rid of the Jones Act would change things. The problem is this, though. Even with, let's say we got rid of the Jones Act, but we kept the same port infrastructure that we have now, and the like. And by the way, the trucking industry would oppose it because, well, it'll put truckers out of work. But which actually it would change the nature of trucking. I mean, there's always a need for transportation. And I think that we really have to, you have to understand that in a market system, if a service is useful, there's going to be a market for it. All right, you've got to find where that market is. But with a regulatory system like we have, the first thing is it blocks certain markets. The second thing is you end up with a constituency that depends on that regulation for survival. And that's like, for example, ethanol. That, nobody in their right mind would put ethanol in a vehicle. I used to tell my students that you don't pour Jack Daniels in your car, you drink it. That's the proper use for it. But what do you have? You've got Iowa. Iowa's the first, it's the first big political event for the presidential campaign. So you got all these guys going there and singing the praises of ethanol. I remember Newt Gingrich calling for in 2016 or so, calling for maybe it's 2012, or whatever. 2012, calling for requiring all cars to be E85 and all sorts of things like that. And you just go there to play up to Iowa because they grow a lot of corn and process a lot of it into ethanol. Of course, that's a malinvestment in corn as well. And so you end up. Remember, I said you start with the final product. You start working backward to the factors. And what happens in a regulatory system is it makes these factors go askew. And I'll be honest with you that even with all this, even with the craziness and the lockdowns and all of the really bad policy, it's amazing that we still are actually able to get things that we need. Yeah. And it's an extraordinary effort by the people working around a lot of this madness. Yeah. But what happens, if the government really cracks down and starts getting really crazy, at some point the system could really break down, and then you would see a lot of chaos, and it would not be pretty.
So with that, and that brings me to really kind of my so what question for normal people, again, who are watching this happen, who have very little influence on policy that's made. We can vote, we can do those things, and we should. But as households, as individuals who need to look down the road and say, it's not a perfect world, it's not a utopian society, we don't know what the next administration is going to do. What is your advice, each one of you, from a different perspective, what's your advice to people like me? I've got 4 kids, I've got a house in the suburbs, I need to somehow hedge against what potentially could happen. What's some advice that people need to heed, and how can they begin to prepare for some of these things?
I think preparedness takes a couple of different phases. I mean, number one, you've got to get out there and vote. You've got to vote for people that will talk about the issues and will make a public commitment to doing the right thing. And you have to support those folks, and you've got to make sure that this becomes an issue. Number two is you really need to start looking at your household consumption. And I'm not saying start hoarding things, but there's, it wouldn't be a bad idea to have some extra canned goods around. It wouldn't be a bad idea to have some freeze-dried food sitting around for if something happens. I mean, we're looking at serious food problems coming into this year and next year because of the fertilizer shortage that's coming from the war in Ukraine. So it's being prepared, it's voting, and it's making this a topic that you talk about with friends and with family so that they can understand the importance of this. And let me give you one other example of how this impacts the everyday person, right? The U.S. Is a major exporter of soybeans to China. Brazil is the second largest exporter of soybeans to China. Brazil said, you know what? We want to beat America. So they looked where the soybeans were grown in Brazil. They looked at the closest port, and they invested a ton of money in infrastructure, both in the roads and in the port. And now they can get soybeans from Brazil to China less expensive than we can from the U.S. to China. And so we're at the verge of losing our status of exporting that. That hurts farmers. That hurts people in the middle of the country. And no one talks about that. It's not a sexy topic, but it's a topic that impacts people's lives and impacts their ability to go spend money, which then, contributes to the rest of the economy.
Yeah, I think that the first thing that came to mind is the Mormon church. Mormons are supposed to have like a year's supply of food on hand. Generally, with canned goods or freeze dried goods, stuff like that. It's not a bad idea anyway. It's kind of like try to keep things available. I mean, it's hard to know, and I'm very, very reluctant to constantly be predicting just the collapse of the world. I mean, I'm not Alex Jones, and I remember that in 1982 when Doug Casey wrote in Reason that we were about to enter the Greater Depression, and this is going to happen, and then he kept on referring to it, and 40 years later, he just finally gave up and said, "We're in the Greater Depression." And but I think that, but not have a Pollyanna a view of the world, because I'm always amazed at how hard our people work to put things together, to patch things together, to make things work. But at the same time, you've got a political system out there that is becoming more and more destructive. And unfortunately, the two most destructive political systems are state political systems are in major cities and major states. I mean, New York and California, and so those are places that now the Port of New York is nothing like it used to be by any means, but certainly California is, because we do so much trade through Asia, and I think that you have to understand that these things can happen. You want to have some kind of line of defense, personal defense. it won't last forever. I mean, if things really collapse like crazy and go nutso, we probably are going to get caught up with it one way or the other. And there's not, we would have to always try to, go through the cracks. But at the same time, I think, that doing things that we're doing right now, talking about it, getting the word out to people, and maybe we can help make a difference.
That's good. One of the ways, William, that a lot of people can find out about what's going on is through the Mises Institute. Can you talk about that for just a second and how people can connect with you guys there?
Well, I think you go to our webpage, Mises.org. I'm the one of the editors for that. Most of the articles you'll see on that webpage are the ones that I've edited, that come through. And so that's my personal connection there, and I've written a lot for it as well. But it's not just daily articles. My gosh, it's events, it's books, it's speakers and the like, and they put out a lot of material that all the way from very, I think, academically rich material like what you would see from Professor Peter Klein, to the more practical stuff, the things that you read on our page or on our blog and the like. So I would, there are a lot of things that page has and that, the Institute has that I think would very, very, very helpful.
That's great. Jim, where can people follow you, the work that you're doing? And you have such a clear mind on this. People need to get behind that.
Yeah, so you can find a lot of my writings on the National Pulse website. That's edited by Raheem Kassam. You can also follow me on True Social at Big Jim 6555. That's capital BIG, capital JIM 6555. And I'll also be setting up a Substack here in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. William Anderson and Jim Nelles, thank you so much. Really appreciate your insights on all this. So important.
Well, thank you.
Have a great day. Thank you.
You too. Have a good day.
MyPillow is having their biggest sheet sale of the year. You all have helped build MyPillow into the amazing company that it is today. Now, Mike Lindell, inventor and CEO, wants to give back exclusively to his listeners. The Percale and Giza Dream bed sheet sets are available in a variety of colors and sizes, and they are all on sale for as low as $29.98 with our listener promo code. Order now, because when they're gone, they're gone. The Percale and Giza Dream sheets are breathable and have a cool, crisp feel. They come with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. Don't miss out on this incredible offer. There's a limited supply, so be sure to order now. Call 1-800-870-0283. Use the promo code SITREP or go to mypillow.com, click on the radio listener square, and use promo code SITREP. I listened to interviews like that one, and maybe you had the same response. I'm so thankful there are actual experts that know what's going on in the world, and I'm glad that we can talk to them. Jim mentioned this in the interview, that one of the things we can be doing, in spite of everything that's happening in the world and the economic world for sure, supply chain, is talk about these things. We just don't talk about them. I think many of us are hesitant to talk about these issues because we just feel like we don't understand enough to fully expound on and explain as we're talking what's happening. I'm thankful for folks like William and Jim who get it, they understand it, and they can explain it in a way that we can understand it. Please go and check out the Mises Institute, check out the areas that Jim mentioned that he writes, and very grateful for him not only doing this as a job, but writing on it, explaining it, and William, of course, as well. Thankful for these men and for this interview. This is an episode you are going to want to share out. I guarantee there are people in your life who need to hear this, who don't understand it, who will be better off because you sent this out to them. So please do that. First thing you need to do, though, is be subscribed to the podcast. If you're not yet subscribed, subscribe. I don't know what you're waiting for. Subscribe right there on your favorite podcast platform, the one you're listening from. That'd be awesome. Leave us a rating if you can. That helps us, of course. That helps the show. And then once you've done that, go over to YouTube. You can find our channel, The Situation Report, on YouTube. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave us a comment, share this content out. You may say, what does that do for you? Well, for you, it allows you to have access to the content that we provide at no cost to you. We want to make sure that you have that. For us, it gives us the opportunity to continue preparing, providing, and creating content like this, having conversations like this. And again, our goal is that you'll be helped, and the culture in which we live, as quickly as things are changing, we need a source for the right information and perspectives. And we want this show, The Situation Report, to be that for you. So subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel, and that would be fantastic. Really appreciate you listening and or watching today. Look forward to talking to you next time. Many of our veterans feel they need to fight their battles alone. This self-isolation has led to the staggering statistic of more than 20 veterans taking their lives every day. The mission of Mighty Oaks is to eradicate the veteran suicide epidemic and help our warriors change their legacies. We've been able to help over 4,000 veterans and first responders by equipping them with the tools they need to live the lives they were created to live. Our faith-based, peer-to-peer approach has one of the highest success rates of any program available today, offering hope and understanding to those who need it most. By aligning their lives to biblical principles, these men and women are able to lead their families, their communities, and our nation. It's your generosity that can make a difference in the lives of the men and women who have fought for our country and our freedoms. Now that they're home, don't let them fight alone. Learn more at mightyoaksprograms.org.